For 17 years, you've heard the same version. But there's a truth the McCanns themselves hid, and it changes everything. Today, we're going to pull back that closed curtain and reveal what the world never knew about the Madeleine case. A closed curtain doesn't make noise, but its silence weighs heavy. For 17 years, that curtain stayed in place, untouched, as if no one was allowed to pull it back. And maybe that's what's most unsettling. Not what happened that night, but what was chosen to never be said afterward. What if the most important part of the Madeleine McCann case wasn't the night she disappeared, but the days that followed, the decisions made, the questions refused, the documents that vanished without explanation? Why did the British media suppress so many contradictions? Why did the parents hire lawyers before even cooperating with the police? Why did Kate McCann refuse to answer 48 formal questions while claiming to be desperately searching for her daughter? You know the pain of the story, but maybe you haven't yet seen the part that was silenced. Not for lack of evidence, but because some names are too big to be questioned out loud. The question was never just, who took Madeleine? The real question is, why did the McCanns hide what they knew, even if it cost justice? There's a kind of silence that doesn't come from absence, but from choice. A pause too long to seem innocent, a line too rehearsed to feel spontaneous. It's the silence you feel when you realize something important was left out, when grief seems too contained, when the face doesn't match the tone of voice, when someone doesn't answer the simplest questions, and yet no one dares to press harder. Because behind that curtain, there's something that threatens not just a family, but the image the world built of them. Today we're going to pull that curtain back, not to accuse, but to finally look at what's been hidden. If you also feel this story was never complete, then stay, because what comes next isn't about a crime. It's about a pact of silence that lasted far too long. They were the picture of the perfect family. Doctors, British, well-dressed. On the night Madeleine disappeared, the world was introduced to the McCanns as devastated parents. But what no one knew at that first press conference was that the silence had already begun. The Portuguese police noticed something odd from the start. The room showed no signs of a break-in. No neighbor heard a sound. No hotel staff saw anything unusual. Yet within hours, the British media crafted the official version, abduction, with an invisible enemy out there. But inside the investigation, something didn't add up. One Portuguese detective recalled, they said they were desperate, but refused to hand over their phones. Another, their answers seemed rehearsed, and the questions that bothered them, they didn't answer. Kate McCann, the mother, refused to answer 48 formal police questions. Simple questions like, why were the children's room windows closed if it was warm? Or, did you notice anything strange about Madeleine's clothes that night? Doubt began to grow. And then came the moment that changed everything. Sniffer dogs detected the scent of a corpse in the apartment's living room and in the trunk of the McCann's rental car, rented 25 days after the disappearance. Instead of seeking explanations, the McCanns hired a team of lawyers and spokespeople. From that point on, every interview, every statement, every public appearance was controlled. It wasn't just grief anymore. It was image management. This doesn't prove guilt, but it raises the question, why would someone who lost a daughter avoid questions, ignore clues, and silence details? And that's when the curtain starts to shift. The moment the Portuguese police began to suspect the parents, something curious happened. The British press turned. Overnight, the McCanns went from being just victims to possible suspects. But the parents' response wasn't to open the doors to truth. It was to file lawsuits, pressure diplomats, and launch a multi-million-dollar fundraising campaign focused entirely on rebuilding their reputation. The British ambassador showed up at the crime scene the next day. Scotland Yard took years to open a parallel investigation, and to this day, the sniffer dog report and the 48 unanswered questions are not mentioned in official interviews. You start to realize that the silence here wasn't passive. It was chosen, strategic. Imagine a dark room and someone walks in saying, "Don't look at the left corner." Naturally, that's where your eyes go. But in the McCann's case, every time the focus got close to that dark corner, the family's behavior, the gaps in their story, the lawyer's actions, someone missing clues, contradictions never revisited, people close to the case who changed their stories over time. A friend of the couple, present that night, said in 2007 that the window was open. Years later, he said the opposite. Who protects this silence? And more importantly, what does it protect? Love doesn't erase doubt, and grief doesn't erase responsibility. Maybe the greatest danger of this story isn't the girl's disappearance, but the public's acceptance that certain silences are normal, as long as they come from the right people. The problem was never just the disappearance. The problem is that those who should want every answer chose to silence the most important questions. And that's where the ground really starts to crack. The moment the sniffer dogs entered apartment 5A in Praia da Luz, the air was too still, no sound, just the scratch of paws on the floor and the sharp focus of their noses. Eddie and Keila, trained to detect blood and cadaver scent, stopped in places no one expected. In the parents' bedroom, behind the living room sofa, in the trunk of the McCann's rental car, rented nearly a month after the disappearance. The investigation team held their breath. The report was written, and then it was ignored. Not by the Portuguese police, but by the official narrative, by the British media, by the parents themselves. There was an error in the dog's protocol, they said. No counter evidence, no technical explanation, just a quick, efficient shift in focus. Kate, by then, had already refused to answer 48 formal police questions. She claimed she didn't want to hinder the investigation. But how does answering questions hinder anything? One question, did you enter the children's room that night? Another, did you see Madeleine get out of bed? The air in the police station was thick. The Portuguese detective wrote everything down, even without answers. Across the table, Kate seemed unsure whether to face the paper or her own fear. And there was more. No signs of a break-in were found at the window. Though the public story insisted the abductor entered there, the shutters were intact, the latch locked from the inside. None of this is definitive proof, but it's too much noise, in a place that should scream clarity. That's when the public image began to disconnect from the reality of the case. An invisible gap opened between what was shown to the world and what was truly known behind the curtain. And when someone asked why things didn't add up, the response came with a polite smile and a lawyer by their side. The truth wasn't erased, it was covered. Point by point, word by word, every measured interview, every rehearsed press conference. The grief was real, no one denies that, but the way it was handled felt more like defense than a search. In the end, it wasn't a lack of evidence that protected the McCanns, it was an excess of silence. The silence of doubt, the silence of the media, the silence of institutions that preferred to avoid a diplomatic clash between two countries. And that silence doesn't feel neutral, it feels comfortable for those who control it. The technical term, later used by scholars, is simple: the banality of evil. It's when evil doesn't arrive shouting or committing brutal acts. It settles in small gestures, in everyday decisions, in choices that, on their own, don't seem wrong, but together, they erase an entire truth. Like refusing to answer, like changing stories, like avoiding witnesses, like telling only half the night. From that point on, everything changed. The public, once swept up in empathy, began to split. Some saw devastated parents. Others saw protagonists of a silence too uncomfortable to be accidental. And the question no one wants to ask keeps coming back. What if it wasn't what they said? You know, some things time can't dilute. Certain questions linger. Not because we want a cruel answer, but because something here doesn't fit. Because when a child disappears, what you expect is a scream, not management, truth, not marketing, and maybe the scariest part is realizing that everyone helped keep the curtain in place. Journalists, authorities, even us, who heard, felt something off, but said, "Oh, they're already suffering too much." It's strange how certain truths only hurt when they fall silent. And yet, what's coming is even harder to swallow, because not all the windows were closed that night. Some were closed afterward. The curtain was pulled back, and what appeared behind it wasn't a confession, nor a guilty party with a name, address, and undeniable proof. What emerged was emptiness, the absence of questions, the coldness of silence, and a girl who never had the chance to tell if it was through the window, the door, or time itself. The greater wound is this: never knowing if someone tried to tell the truth and was silenced by those who claimed to protect her. The Madeleine case stopped being just a police matter long ago. It became a mirror, and not everyone liked what they saw reflected. Because when a mother refuses to answer 48 police questions, no one expects joy. But they also don't expect an exclusive interview days later with perfect makeup and a prepared script. When the family's rental car carries a scent that expert dogs recognize as death, and it's swept from the press as a protocol error, something burns inside. It's not anger, it's disillusionment. Truth isn't a spectacle, but calculated silence is. And that's what left the whole world uneasy. Not just the possibility of guilt, but how easily so many accepted not knowing. The journalists who avoided tough questions, the lawyers who worked harder to contain the narrative than to free it, the supporters who attacked anyone who dared to ask, and us, who watched it all in silence. As if grief justified every omission, as if compassion were incompatible with justice. But justice was never synonymous with comfort. It demands unease. It begins when someone says, "This isn't enough." The curtain, once a symbol of protection, now feels different. It's no longer a barrier against the world. It's a reminder of what was hidden. It became the portrait of the fear of displeasing, of seeming cold, of placing truth above image. And that's why, even if we never get a final answer, some questions need to keep echoing, not to punish, but to remind us that there were failures that cost more than we can admit. How many investigations stopped because someone preferred to preserve reputations? How many truths died before the victim? We're not talking about certainties. We're talking about courage. Courage to look at the story and ask, what did I let slide? What did I let stay silent? Years later, a Portuguese officer looked at the camera and said, "We never wanted to accuse. We just wanted answers." His voice was low, tired, but firm, like someone who knows they might have done the right thing, but was punished for not doing what was expected. That's the price of pulling the curtain. You never know what you'll find, but you know that if you don't pull it, you'll spend your life staring at the same walls, pretending there's nothing behind them. The truth sometimes is this: a room with an open window, a made bed, and an emptiness no one can fill. But pulling the curtain lets in light, and maybe that's all that's left, to illuminate, even if it's late, even if no one else wants to look, because silence didn't kill Madeleine. But maybe it buried the chance for justice. And justice, even when it can't punish, can still set free. There was a moment right in the middle of the silence when everything seemed to stop. The story didn't need more noise, it needed space. And when that space appeared, I realized what kills the truth isn't the lie, it's the absence of those who ask. This Madeleine story, it's told as if it's complete, but you felt it, didn't you? It never was. It was packaged, organized to fit, pretty to look at, polished in interviews, solid behind the scenes. But when you brush it with your fingertips, something doesn't fit, because no one answers 48 questions with silence by accident. No one ignores the scent of death in a rented car without feeling something, and no one dismantles an intact window to tell a break-in story, unless there's something bigger to hide. It's hard to say this without sounding like an accusation, but that's not the point. It's not about judging, it's about admitting that choosing not to speak speaks loudly. The curtain in that house, the one that stayed closed for years, isn't just fabric. It became a symbol. At first it seemed to protect grief. Today it seems to protect a pact. And that hurts me, because there was a 3-year-old girl in there. 3. Too innocent to carry so much silence around her. And the whole world learned to repeat, poor parents, imagine what they went through. But almost no one asked, why didn't they ever want to answer everything? That's what gets me. Not the crime itself, but the way it was packaged, shielded, and swallowed. As if we accepted feeling pity instead of seeking justice. As if what wasn't said was less important than keeping up appearances. I look at this story and see a mirror. How many times do we also silence what bothers us just to protect what seems too beautiful to be deconstructed? How many times do we pretend not to see, pretend not to know, pretend believing is easier, not as certainty, but as someone tired of accepting a closed curtain as a sign of mourning? Because real mourning isn't afraid of truth. Mourning doesn't hide. Mourning doesn't hire a lawyer before calling the police. Mourning screams, cries, demands. Mourning doesn't organize itself into a press conference with makeup and rehearsed answers. And now that you've heard all this, maybe you felt what I did. It's not about figuring everything out. It's about not accepting nothing. Justice was never about absolute certainty. It's about the courage to dig, to not let things slide. And sometimes that starts with a simple act, pulling the curtain. And if this video made you feel something similar, if some part of it weighed on you, stirred you, or reminded you of an absence left unexplained, then that act is yours too. Write in the comments, I pull the curtain, not because we know everything, but because we refuse to keep pretending nothing happened, that it was all just bad luck, that their silence was just grief, not strategy. And if you felt that this space here needs to keep existing, this space where we don't just tell stories but listen to what wasn't said, there's another way to make your presence felt. Super chat, not as casual support, but as a symbolic gesture, like lighting a candle, a whisper saying, I'm not alone in this. A silent message, this story is mine too. If you believe there are stories that can't be left in the dark anymore, that need someone willing to face what others pretend not to see, this is the moment. Write, show up, be part of it. And if you made it this far, I need to thank you, because it wasn't light, and you stayed, you listened, you didn't turn away, and there's more coming. Other stories that also carry silence, the scent of something covered up, windows that never truly opened. The next one isn't just about a disappearance. It's about who was left behind, about how silence seeps into gestures, official versions, family albums. Subscribe, but not just for the algorithm. Subscribe because this is a space for confrontation, for good unease, for truth without makeup. And before you go, I'll leave you with one question, the kind that lingers after the screen goes dark. What if what's missing isn't another piece of evidence? What if what's missing is just permission? Permission to see what was already there. Permission to pull the curtain. Now it's up to you. Write it. I pull the curtain. Even if it's just that. One line, one breath, one sign. Because some stories don't need answers. They need courage. And today, maybe we started finding that together.